Today, we're talking about something really fascinating, a quiet revolution that's happening inside nursing schools. It's this whole new way of teaching that's preparing nurses to be more than just skilled clinicians. It's about turning them into leaders and advocates who can shape a healthier society for all of us.
I mean, think about it. Modern nursing is so much more than just following orders. It's all about critical thinking, it's about empathy, it's about solving incredibly complex problems on the fly. Nurses are right there on the front lines, dealing with ethical dilemmas, fighting for their patients. It's a huge, huge job.
Which kind of begs the question, right? If the job is so dynamic, interactive, why is so much of the training based on sitting in a lecture hall, just passively soaking up information? There's a real disconnect there, and a lot of educators are finally starting to tackle it.
And that brings us to this first major shift, this idea of moving beyond the textbook, away from passive learning and into a world of active participation.
You know, what's so interesting here is how the student's role completely flips. The old way treated students almost like empty jars, just there to be filled up with facts so they can pour them back out on a test. But this new way sees them as active participants. They're not just consuming knowledge, they're helping to create it, applying it to real problems and learning for a purpose that goes way beyond just getting a grade.
The brilliant educator Paulo Freire had a name for this old method. He called it the banking model, and this quote just nails it. The teacher makes deposits of information into the student. But here's the thing, healthcare isn't a bank. It's a living, messy, human system, and it demands a heck of a lot more than just rote memorization.
So what's the alternative? Well, it's a whole new philosophy of education, really. It's all built around what's being called the participatory classroom, and it stands on two big ideas.
First up is this idea of a participatory culture. This is where students actually become creators. They're making and sharing things for real people with real needs outside the classroom walls. So think less about writing a term paper and more about creating, say, a public health campaign. The other piece of the puzzle is what's called democratic digital engagement. I mean, we live in a digital world, right? So being an engaged citizen today means using online tools to work together and to have a voice in public conversations. For a nurse, that might mean using social media to fight medical misinformation or to advocate for a new health policy.
Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but what does it actually look like when a nursing student is doing this stuff? Let's dig into some real-world examples.
So instead of an essay that only their professor is ever going to see, students are creating resources that have a real impact. Imagine a series of infographics that uses local data to tackle vaccine hesitancy right in their own neighborhood. Or maybe a short, simple training video that helps care home staff get better at assessing pain for people with dementia. These projects build skills, sure, but they also serve a real immediate need.
And to really see how this works, let's walk through a case study from the source material. It's a student-led campaign all about raising public awareness for Noxolone, the drug that can reverse an opioid overdose. So how'd they pull it off? First, they didn't just go it alone. They partnered with a local harm reduction group to make sure their work was grounded in reality. And then, and this is so important, they actually talked to people in the community to understand their real lived experiences. They didn't just guess what to say. From there, they co-created the campaign's message and then used social media to blast it out there. This is learning by doing, and the stakes are real. And you know what? It works. The student feedback is incredible. Over 90% of them report being way more engaged when their schoolwork is tied to something that actually helps people. It makes total sense, right? When students see their work making a real difference for patients or their community, their whole motivation just transforms.
Of course, a new way of learning like this, it demands a totally new way of teaching. It's not just the students who have to change, the educators have to evolve too.
This image just captures the shift perfectly. We are moving from the sage on the stage, that all-knowing expert at the front of the room, to the guide on the side. This new kind of teacher is a facilitator. They're not there to give you all the answers. They're there to ask the right questions, to guide the inquiry, and to look at the whole messy process of learning and growth, not just the finished product.
So why does any of this really matter? Well, it's because teaching nurses this way doesn't just make them better students, it makes them better nurses. And that leads to better healthcare for every single one of us. This kind of education isn't just about teaching clinical skills. It's about embedding the core values of nursing right into the learning process itself. Students aren't just reading a chapter about advocacy, they are being advocates. They are literally practicing leadership, collaboration, and social justice as a fundamental part of their education.
But okay, let's be real for a second. This transformation isn't always easy.
There are some pretty big challenges to making this approach work for everybody. One of the biggest hurdles is something called the participation gap. As you can see here, there's a huge difference in access between schools with a lot of resources and those with very few. And we're not just talking about who has a laptop. We're talking about reliable internet, modern software, and, this is key, the training and support to actually use all these tools well. We have to be careful that this educational revolution doesn't end up leaving a lot of people behind.
So, to wrap it all up, what have we learned? Well, nursing education is making this incredible shift from passive consumption to active co-creation. Students are making real-world resources for authentic audiences, and in doing so, they're building these crucial skills like digital literacy, ethical reflection, and advocacy. At the end of the day, this prepares nurses to be not just great clinicians at the bedside, but also truly engaged citizens in the world. Which really just leaves us with one final big question to think about. If the way we educate our nurses fundamentally shapes how they care for us, how they see their role in the world, then what kind of healing and what kind of healers do we really want to create for our future?